I have the pleasure of introducing Major General James Mukoyama. Major Mukoyama was born August 3rd, 1944, the second son to Japanese immigrants in Chicago. Mook, as he was affectionately known during his military career, he rose from humble blue-collar roots to becoming the first Asian American to command a U.S. Army division. That's 30 years of active reserve service, including tours of Korea and Vietnam. He earned the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and more along the way. Beyond his service, General Mukoyama has continued to be a trailblazer for Asian Americans and minorities everywhere, serving as the chairman of the Advisory Committee for Minority Veterans, vice chairman of the National Japanese American Memorial to Patriotism, and as a devoted member of the Ministry of Military Outreach USA. General Mukoyama currently lives with his beloved wife and inspiration, KJ, in Glenview. Welcome, please, Major General James Mukoyama, U.S.
Thanks so much, Jim. Well, can you all hear me in the back? Okay. I asked that question once, and the guy in the front said, "Yeah, I can hear you. I want to move to the back." So, as an octogenarian, it's nice to speak to members of my general age cohort without having to explain who Norman Rockwell was, or what the Yellow Pages or the Rolodexes were, or what happened on November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas. And being a military man, I have a story related to World War II to which our generation could relate. It involved Admiral Chester Nimitz, the Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Pacific Fleet, and General Douglas A. MacArthur, Supreme Commander, Southwest Pacific Area. Now, they were out in a small boat in the Philippines when a sudden squall came up. It was so violent that they were both thrown out of the boat. As it turned out, Admiral Nimitz was having trouble in the water. General MacArthur had to swim over to him and help him to get back into the boat. "Mac," Admiral Nimitz pleaded, "please don't tell anyone about this. My sailors would be embarrassed if they learned I could not swim." "Don't worry, Chester," General MacArthur replied. "Your secret is safe with me. My soldiers would be mortified if they learned I couldn't walk on water." Now, I'm also pleased to address my fellow North Shore neighbors. My wife and I bought our first home in Skokie in 1972, and 10 years later built our dream home in Glenview, where we still live today. And I have had the honor to address numerous veterans, civic, educational, and religious organizations throughout the northern suburbs. So for those of you who know me, here it comes. I have a daily standard mantra, and it goes like this: every day is a great day. I have my faith, my family, and live in the finest country in the world. Now, I say this every day, every chance I get. When I do our grocery shopping at Jewel, all of the cashiers want me to come to their station because they want to hear my mantra. Now, the mantra comes from my experience as a young infantry officer in combat, when I didn't know if I was going to be alive the next moment, much less see the next sunrise. Now, when you're in those circumstances, what is important in life becomes clearly focused, and that is faith, family, and living in this great nation. Now, sometimes I get pushback about the finest country in the world part. Is our country perfect? Of course not. But being longer in the tooth than most of my audiences, I had the benefit of having witnessed the wisdom of our founding fathers in creating the oldest still existing constitution in the world that has provided for a government with built-in checks and balances and an amendment process to correct wrongs. Our nation was based on a truly revolutionary concept of a nation with free individuals, with unalienable rights bestowed upon its citizens by our Creator. It was based on a concept of a nation of free individuals, not based on any specific religion or ethnicity. It has always been and is still today the beacon of freedom and opportunity for the entire world. Both my father and wife immigrated legally to America to achieve the American dream. As a minority in my lifetime alone, I have witnessed tremendous improvements in race relations and equal opportunity in our nation. I have seen the integration of our schools, the elimination of real estate redlining and hiring discrimination, and the canceling of laws prohibiting interracial marriages. And today, it is the least racist, large multi-ethnic society in the world. I've seen an African American elected as president and re-elected. And we have admitted errors in our past. We've taken corrective action and paid for them dearly. The Union Army lost over 300,000 soldiers' lives in the Civil War to eliminate slavery. No other nation has paid such a high price to correct the social injustice. And there is a disaster, either natural, who shows up voluntarily with medical supplies, food, equipment, and personnel? The answer, the United States is the forum of our country, and we need to remain ever vigilant and thus maintain our freedoms and opportunity for our future generations. Now, the NSSC Tuesday Club has very generously provided me this opportunity to discuss my recently published book, the title of which will not surprise you, and that is Faith, Family, and Flag, Memoirs of an Unlikely American Samurai Crusader. Now, for the balance of my remarks, I will therefore proceed to briefly discuss how the book came to be, including my author's intent, the creative and publishing process, and end with 3 key excerpts. And since I enjoyed the exchange of ideas, I will leave time for questions and answers. Now, writing a book was never on my bucket list, as I am still active leading Military Outreach USA, a faith-based nonprofit I founded serving our military community, specifically assisting homeless veterans and reducing the veteran suicide rate of 22 plus per day in our nation. I am also active in our church activities and several governmental and other nonprofit and educational organizations. Now, 2 years ago, I was giving a benediction at a fundraising event for veterans and having a conversation with Alan Lynch a Vietnam veteran and recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor, Andrew Tangen, supervisor of the Lake County Veterans Assistance Commission, and Karen Davidman, at that time executive assistant for my U.S. Congressman Brad Schneider. I was sharing some of my experiences with my World War II Japanese American veterans. And Andrew said, he poo-pooed the idea, replying that I didn't think any. All three encouraged me to reconsider with offers of assistance. I thought about it overnight, and after reconfirming with all three, I decided to move forward. Now, once I made the decision, my military and business executive experience took over the process. I first asked myself, what is the purpose of writing this book? If it was to be a simple autobiography, I didn't need to do that. My mission became clear. This book is simply intended to demonstrate the blessings and influence of God in my life, and thereby encouraging others to overcome seemingly overwhelming odds. It is a book about war, but not only a military war, but more importantly, a spiritual war against the forces of evil and temptation that we face every moment of every day. I then had to decide who is my target audience. I came up with 4. 1, people of faith or needing faith. 2, members of the military family. 3, minorities, since I are one, and the youth of our nation who are not receiving sufficient education about our nation's founding principles, history, sacrifices, and accomplishments for people of the entire world. I immediately began writing, and the organization Words and Experiences just flowed. As I completed a chapter, I would give it to my wife, KJ, for her review, but I asked her to withhold her comments until I was finished writing because I was really on a roll, just churning out the words. I had the first manuscript completed in 3 months. It was comprised of an introduction, 18 chapters, an epilogue, and 39,000 words. Now, I had never written a book, so I didn't know if that was small, medium, or large. But I felt a huge relief. Then my wife raised her hand and did one of these things. And she, in fact, had a come to wife conversation. And as it turned out, her knowledge of over 50 years of sharing our lives together gave her keen insight to improve the story. As a result, the final product is 25 chapters and 55,000 plus words, and a tremendously improved product. With manuscript in hand, since I was neither qualified nor frankly had the time or desire to self-publish, I could have come here and gotten some advice. I started looking for a publisher. My first choice was Moody Publishing here in Chicago. I had several connections with Moody, but upon review, they had no interest. Now, in the meantime, I sent the manuscript to some friends for their review and comments, and perhaps a sentence or two saying it was the greatest thing since sliced bread for the book jacket. One of those was Jocko Willink, a retired Navy SEAL team member who has a very popular podcast, is a martial arts expert with gyms in California, has written best-selling books on leadership, and often appears on national television networks, including Fox News and Dennis Prager's PragerU videos, commenting on military matters. I had been interviewed on one of his podcasts 5 years earlier about my combat and life experiences overall. So after reviewing my manuscript, Jocko responded and asked me if I had a publisher. I told him I was still looking. He then said, "General, I have a publishing company. If you want to get it published, it's done." And I immediately said, "Sold." So the rest is history. He assigned an editor to me, and some excellent suggestions were made to improve the flow of the story. But since I am an English major, the final product is actually 98% of my original writing. So you can blame me, come to me on anything that you disagree with. And I welcome comments, I truly do. And I hope that'll be part of our question and answers here. A special bonus was that Jocko volunteered to write the foreword of the book, and furthermore, did an entire new podcast interview about the book and my life. By the way, 3 hours long. In addition, he connected me with Dennis Prager, who was kind enough to interview me in his Los Angeles studio on his nationally syndicated radio program. And he gave me an entire 1-hour segment. The supporters helped generate considerable book sales. I need to mention here that my wife and I do not keep any profits from the donations we receive for the book. Half of the profits we donate to Military Outreach USA. The other half we donate to our church, Hope Community Church in Glenview. Now, the final part of my presentation today are 3 examples of subjects and experiences from the book. The first involves one of numerous interventions by the good Lord in my life, which I refer to as God things. 13 years ago, I got up in the morning and was shaving, getting ready to go to work. I felt a pain in my chest. Now, it wasn't a pounding pain. I wasn't dizzy. I didn't have a fever. So I thought it was something I had eaten the night before. Give it 5 minutes and it'll go away. Well, it didn't. So I finished shaving and getting dressed and asked my wife to drive me to the emergency room at Glenbrook Hospital. I walked into the ER and I said, "Hey, I've got a pain in my chest." They immediately took an EKG and said, "You have had a heart attack." Suddenly, I was immediately dressed in a hospital gown, put on a gurney, and I was on my way to the operating room. In the hallway, I said to myself, "Self, can you say today is a great day?" And I said, yes. I had survived combat, had a wonderful family, and most importantly, had my personal relationship with God and a peace of mind. When I was placed on the operating table, the standard procedure is to ask you, "What is your name and how do you feel?" So I replied, "Jim Mukoyama, every day is a great day. I have my faith, my family, and live in the finest country in the world." I can't tell you the effect that had on the personnel in that room. The doctor asked me, "What is your faith?" So my response was, "Well, doc, since you asked me, I'm a Christian. Christ is my Savior. You are a skilled physician with skilled nurses, but I'm in God's hands. I'm good with whatever happens, so let's just get on with it. They did an angiogram and discovered that my LAD, the widowmaker's artery, was 95% blocked. They did an angioplasty and put in a stent. When I woke up in the recovery room, I thought that was it. It wasn't. In fact, I had 2 more operations within 24 hours. My heart cavity had filled up with liquid. It's called a fusion. So I had to go back in to have a drainage tube inserted. Now, during that procedure, when asked how I felt, I repeated my mantra, and the nurse asked me, "Where do you go to church?" I responded, "Willow Creek Community Church in South Barrington, Illinois." She responded, "I do too." No coincidence. Back to the recovery room. My kidneys then failed, and I had to go back to the operating room to have a tube connected to a dialysis machine. During that operation, there was a male nurse who was wearing a camouflage gown. I asked him if he had been in the Army. He said yes, I was a medic. I replied, "Hey, I just want you to know I retired as a 2-star general, so take good care of me." And as I was going under from the anesthetic, I could vaguely hear the nurse saying, "Yes, sir." As Paul Harvey says, the rest of the story. I underwent dialysis for 4 months and surprisingly got a donor. And the donor was our daughter, but she is not our biological daughter. We had adopted her 30 years earlier, and yet she was a match. Only God. The second excerpt involves my Norman Rockwell life. As a youngster, I always thought I was leading a normal life. As I grew longer in the tooth, I realized how truly abnormally blessed I was. My father was an immigrant from Japan, and we always lived in a tenant apartment building. We never owned a home. Yet, I never felt poor because of the values inculcated in me by my church community, my intact nuclear family, and experiencing the American dream. As is with many immigrant families, especially from Asian cultures, I had the benefit of living with my grandparents, learning from their wisdom, and observing the aging process. My wife and I were blessed to give our children that same experience. And that was all due to my wife, KJ, who let my parents, not hers, live with us in the same home for 22 years until they passed away. And she was their primary caregiver. Our meeting and marrying was another God thing. KJ immigrated from South Korea to the States by herself, dreaming to get a college degree. Unfortunately for her, but my life's most important blessing after my faith decision, she met me. And what a great catch I was. I had just returned from Vietnam, left the Army, was unemployed, and living with my parents in Chicago, not in the basement. She, on the other hand, was sponsored by a rich American family living in Silicon Valley in California. I met her when I was visiting family, and a girl cousin of mine worked for the same company where KJ did. And she introduced us. It was love at first sight for me. Now, I should inform you that relations between Korea and Japan were extremely bad due to a brutal decades-long forced occupation of Korea by Japan. The odds of a man of Japanese ancestry marrying a Korean woman on a scale of 1 to 100, 100 being high, is a minus 50. Yet God made it happen. KJ has been a wonderful wife, mother, and daughter-in-law. I have not been the best husband with anger management problems. Yet this past weekend, we celebrated our 54th anniversary. So I guess she thinks I'm a keeper. I have devoted a full chapter in my book to her with numerous citations throughout the book of her love and serving spiritual gift to others. The chapter title is, quote, "What is an angel? I've seen one for 50 years, unquote. She has been my life inspiration and counselor. I could not have achieved my modest accomplishments in life without her. I thank the good Lord every day for my life partner." The third excerpt requires a short explanation of a wound of war that is a significant contributor to the unacceptably high suicide rate of our military veterans of 22 plus dying per day. It involves a wound called moral injury. Most people have heard of post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury, but not moral injury. The concept is so intuitive that you'll get it in 30 seconds. From the time you are born until you're 18 years old, you develop a personal moral code, a sense of right or wrong. That could come from your family, your religion, your community, whatever. You develop a personal moral code. Then you join the military and you learn a warrior code. That code is superimposed on your personal moral code and in fact transforms it somewhat. Then you might have to participate in activities or operations that violate your personal moral code. You don't have to be the person that pulls the trigger. You could be a witness, or you could feel you should have prevented it, or you follow another unit and you see that innocent civilians have been killed, or you handle body parts. At that time, you sustain a so-called invisible wound of war. It's not physical. You can't see it. But in military operations, you're constantly moving from point A to point B to point C. You don't have time to stop and reflect on this stuff. So what do? You bury it. Then let's say you return to the States, to a civilian community like the North Shore that doesn't understand what you've been through, and it bubbles up to the surface. Unless you have a strong coping mechanism for it or strong community support, bad stuff happens. Anger, guilt, shame, depression, isolation, and suicide. It is the position of Military Outreach USA that the main approach to moral injury is not a medical doctor with prescription drugs, but rather it is the forgiveness of a moral authority, a loving God, the counseling of sensitive clergy and mental health professionals, and the support of a loving community. One of my moral injuries I mention in the book occurred when I was in combat in Vietnam. It was 1969, and I was an infantry company commander. We had just had a battle with the Viet Cong and killed numerous enemy. In fact, there were 3 dead bodies at my feet. Now, the time a unit is most vulnerable is right after a victory. It's just human nature to let your guard down and kind of breathe a sigh of relief. I was the professional, the guy in charge, so I knew this. So I was on my radio barking out orders to my platoon leaders, telling them, take care of your wounded, redistribute ammunition, look for enemy avenues of approach for a counterattack. In the midst of all this going on, the so-called fog of battle, I stopped. I looked at the bodies at my feet and realized that something had happened to me. Something had hardened my heart. Only moments earlier, these were alive human beings, children of God, with families and loved ones that they were fighting for. And I was just treating them like bumps on a log. And then I remembered Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where he told us to pray for our enemies. So in the midst of all this going on, I did. I prayed for the 3 Viet Cong, and I know I was praying for myself just as well. Now, I didn't get on my hands and knees and have a big ceremony. All of this took less than a minute, but it always remained in my mind and heart. Now, years later, I often ask myself why I had not had the problems of my fellow returning combat veterans, such as nightmares, flashbacks, personality changes, or isolation. I always attributed my successful community reintegration to my faith in my loving wife. But after serving veterans now for over 3 decades, I realized that I was 1 in a million who was able to address his moral injury at the time it happened. Now, in summary, I've tried through the story of my life to encourage people dealing with difficult life situations, relationships, physical, psychological, business, financial, and or spiritual. Every day, the good Lord encourages me, and my time with you this morning is such an encouragement. Indeed, every day is a great day. I have my faith, my family, and live in the finest country in the world. And now I will entertain any questions you might have.
Thank you, General. Arnie will take questions from the auditorium.
General, I congratulate you on your life story, your service to the country, your inspiration. It was wonderful. Over the years here at the North Shore Senior Center, we have honored Japanese Americans, particularly those who served while their parents and grandparents were in the concentration camps on the West Coast. I don't know if Rocky Makiyoshi, does that ring a bell?
Yeah.
Great man. We honored Rocky, Enoch Kanoa. Here, they told their stories. We honored them. We also honored the Japanese American soldiers who helped liberate the Dachau death camp during World War II. Your story is great, it's inspiring, and I just want to congratulate you.
Well, thank you so much. Regarding the Japanese American veterans of World War II, they were called Nisei. In Japanese, counting 1, 2, 3 is ichi is 1, ni is 2, and san is 3. So the word for generation is sei, S-E-I. So Issei are the immigrants who settle in the United States. In other words, the first generation to live here. The second generation are called Nisei, and those were that age cohort are the ones who served in World War II, both in Europe and the Pacific, I might add. And the third generation are called Sansei. So in my case, I was actually, my age cohort were Sanseis, but I was not a Sansei because my father was Issei, my mother was Nisei. So I was called Nisei Han. Han means half in Japanese. So I was 2.5, but I had the great honor of meeting these World War II veterans in the 90s when at that point in time, I was a general in the Army. I was an infantry guy. These guys all fought in an infantry regimental combat team or were translators in the Pacific going along with the forward units of the Marines and the Army. And so these guys were all my personal heroes. And so I was involved in a national memorial that we built in Washington, D.C. If you go to Washington, I would recommend that you take a look at it. It's right on the mall on Constitution Avenue. It's between Union Station and the Capitol building. It's called the National Japanese American Memorial to Patriotism. And so I was involved in getting the congressional law passed and then raising the money to build the memorial. And that was 7.5 years of my life, but it was well spent because I went all over the country giving speeches, trying to raise the money. You see, when a national memorial is authorized by Congress, they authorize the memorial, they give you the land, but you have to raise the money to actually construct it, the architect, get all the approvals. In the National Capital Region, there are about a dozen commissions that you have to get approval from to build a memorial. It's a nightmare. It's a bureaucratic mess, but we did it. But in so doing, I would go throughout the whole country, mostly the Japanese American organizations. The large corporations did not donate to it because I think they saw this as an ethnic memorial as opposed to a patriotic memorial, which it was. And so I just enjoyed meeting all these Nisei guys and having my picture taken with them. On the other hand, these guys had all been mostly privates and sergeants and some officers, not many, because when they formed the Japanese regiment, they all had Caucasian officers because they didn't trust the Japanese Americans to have the leadership positions. But they were engaged in so many fierce battles that many, as is in any infantry unit, the NCOs and the junior officers are the ones that go first because they're leading. And so by the end of the war, there were some Japanese American officers. And so I was a general. See, when you're in the service, any service, you never see a general. It doesn't happen. And in the Army, the unit you're normally in is a company, which is about 200 soldiers. The company commander is like a mini god. I mean, literally, he's called the old man, even though he might be 20. I was 24 years old in Vietnam commanding my company. And seeing a general is like, unless you're in trouble, and is just, so these guys all wanted to get their picture with me. So it was just a wonderful mutual love fest.
Thank you. we have friends who are Japanese Americans, and matter of fact, we're going to see them this weekend. But when we talk to them, all of a sudden they said, "Oh yeah, that's when we were in the camps," and then they can continue on with the conversation. They don't seem to have any resentment. How can, or from what in the background of the Japanese Americans do you think builds that kind of confidence or that kind of forgiveness for the concentration camps?
Yeah, thanks for the question, which is really how could the Nisei move on with life with confidence after what happened to them? Just imagine you're 18 years old, you just graduated from college, from high school, you're ready to go on with life, maybe go to college or do whatever, and you get a knock on the door. It's Friday night, and it's your local FBI agent. And he says, Monday morning, be at the corner of Glenview Road and Waukegan with 2 suitcases. That's it. And so what happens is you try to figure out he doesn't say where you're going or what's going to happen. And you can just take what you can carry, and let's say if you have a business, who's going to take care of all this? And you're put in a railroad train, and they pull all the side curtains down so you can't see where you're going. And they take you to some godforsaken part of the interior of the States, normally a desert area, and you're there for 3 years. And after 2 years, the local Army recruiter comes. Oh, and by the way, you're in a concentration camp. It's not a death camp, but it's also not a nice place. Barbed wire, machine guns, towers, machine guns pointing in, not out. And you don't have freedom to go anywhere. And then the local Army recruiter comes and says, I want you to go die for your country. Frankly, I have often asked myself, what would I have done? I cannot honestly answer that question. But the majority of the Nisei were red-blooded Americans. When the war broke out, they all went, like everybody else, every able-bodied guy went to the recruiting station to sign up. But the Japanese Americans were turned away. They couldn't sign up. And in fact, there were some that were already serving in the Army who were released. And so, but the majority of those in the camps actually volunteered and went. And they have the most highly decorated record of any Army unit of its size and service in the history of the United States Army. 21 Congressional Medal of Honor recipients. There's also an award that's given to Army units. The highest award an Army unit can receive is called the Presidential Unit Citation. There are some Army divisions that have never earned that award. This unit was awarded 7 Presidential Unit Citations. When they came back from the war, President Truman actually had a ceremony on the White House lawn presenting them with that Presidential Unit Citation. And he said that you have not only won the war militarily, but you've won the war against discrimination. You had to fight 2 wars. My answer to your question about how they can do that, or what is it in the Japanese culture, it's not the Japanese culture, it's the American culture. They learned, just like I did. They were in Boy Scouts. I talk about it in my book, about how important that was for me in life. The motto of the Boy Scouts is for God and country, in that order. And we learned about civics at that time, which is, as I alluded to, I don't think it's being taught as well as it should today. But we all had to pass a civics test, you know, to graduate from high school. And they knew the history of our nation. They had confidence in our system, our fair system of justice. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court failed them. When they were ordered to go into these camps, they didn't riot, they didn't, you know, resist. Now, keep in mind, this is the time of Jim Crow, and had they tried to resist, it would have been not good, because it was the Army that was enforcing all of this. And the population was extremely angered against Japan. And so what they decided to do was obey the orders, but fight it in court. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court failed them and said that this was okay for them to basically pause habeas corpus. They were not accused of any crime. And I might add, there was never one case proven of an American of Japanese ancestry spying against the United States.
General,
Yes.
I have a question, and we also have to be mindful of the pizza time that forces us to end at 11:30. The question is not a political one. I'm trying to avoid the Democrat-Republican war on immigration, but it's a question about immigration. And you mentioned the word culture. And the culture today versus the culture that my uncles, I have to just share quickly because their story is your story. My four uncles were heroes. They made it through the war, Purple Hearts, Gold Stars. One Italian, Tony, Italian American, when he was shot down over Italy, was shouting in Italian, perfect Italian, to the Italians shooting at him, "Don't shoot me." And when he landed, they asked him in perfect Italian, of course, "Why are you an Italian shooting us?" He says, "Because I'm an American. I'm an American." Okay, now fast forward today. The children of these immigrants like you, heroes, but the children of their children are now different. They see an America that is America, and some of them on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, so it's not picking on any one party, they say immigration is kind of devalued. They don't see the benefits as much as they see the risks. Do you have any thoughts about immigration writ large and the value that you and your brothers and the people, my uncles, have provided to America? We're a country of immigrants, but now we are looking at it a little bit differently. And again, I'm not trying to bring you into the politics, but talk to the culture of, have we forgotten the value of immigration?
Okay, so the question really is, how do I feel about the overall subject of immigration? And my answer, and when you heard me speak, I was very careful to mention that my father and my wife immigrated legally to this country. You know, there are millions of people in this world who are waiting to go through the process to come to this country. Immigration, the diversity of our culture, the American culture, is both our strength and our weakness. The strength is, as we were raising our children, now keep in mind, my wife is Korean. I came from a Japanese cultural background. But when we raised our kids, I'll tell you what, I passed on to them what my father told me as a Japanese immigrant. He said, sons, do not forget your Japanese heritage. Be proud of your name, your family name. Never disgrace it. But most importantly, you are American citizens. This is your country. Make it the best it can be by integrating, assimilating into the American culture. We have benefited so much from the different languages, customs. How about the food, right? I'm a big pizza guy, so you know, but on the other hand, we're human. And unfortunately, one of the basic human faults is prejudice. And not because, and why are people prejudiced? Because they fear what they don't know about. And we need to have programs like we have here at cultures. The beauty of music, of other cultures, art. And you realize that, hey, America's pretty good, but there are a lot of other countries that have a lot of good things for their citizens and their people. And so I'm a huge guy on immigration, but we want people who want to assimilate into our culture and make it the best it can be. So that's why I'm a big proponent of English being official language of our country. Because how do you communicate? You communicate by language. And my father and wife had to learn English. My father, believe it or not, in Japan in 1908 or 9, was forced to memorize the Gettysburg Address in English in Japan because they knew the importance of what was happening, what happened in America with the Civil War, and they realized, and so he dreamed of the opportunity of freedom that we all share here.
Great answer. Thank you.
I think we're kind of towards the end here. And okay, we have some books here. We're asking for a donation of $20 per book. I will personalize every book that anybody would like to have. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, General. Thank you very much.